Okay, so welcome everyone. This is going to be um, a, f- a short synopsis of world cycles using Vedic astrology and a little bit about 2021 and 2022 and a bit of the time ahead of us. And when I say the time ahead of us, I also mean in context of the cycles we are in. Because if we look back in history, what tends to happen is that the human beings, prior to moments of great change in humanity's history, have a lot of anxiety that they're dealing with in various ways. And some of us get a bit apocalyptic about things. Um, and history teaches us that that is not true. The universe or nature or God, whatever you want to call it, there's a reason for things happening. And so I would like to present this to you because I've also seen a lot of, you must have seen online as well, a lot of hype about an age of Aquarius and, all sorts of other things because of the recent Saturn Jupiter conjunction, etc. So I wanted to place all of this in some proper context for you to aid in your own work and your forward therapy with your clients and other people in your life as well. So, also, I'm available for readings, and this recording and talk is free. But if you would like to offer some donations, that would be welcome. So, I would first like to, the highlight for this time in humanity's history is about food, the physical aspects of life, the physical body, genetics. These things are, and also financial securities, are undergoing a change and transformation, as well as our connection to our environment. And so, my teacher, Guruji Sanjay Rath, um, I think last year already asked us to start or begin reciting this verse from the Rig Veda, the fifth mandala of the Rig Veda. And I'm going to do that to begin with. And I will go through the meaning very briefly because Rig Veda mantras really, who knows what they really mean or do, but just in terms of the words themselves. So, someone's phone. Okay, so Tat Savitur is talking to the sun, okay? The eye behind the sun, the eye in the sun. There's various ways of looking at that. The witnessing sun, and that has many implications, levels of sun, energy, etc. Vrini Mahe, granting great boons to that one who has that ability. Vayam, for our enjoyment and food. Think about the various things we are consuming, that we are receiving. There's Vayam that we are receiving. Devasya, those things of the light. So light, the sun is the source of light and life on earth, okay? And that is just at the physical sun level. But there is also the spiritual sun at various levels that are also sustaining us, all right? And that is also a type of food, all right? Spiritual food or psychic or vital food that we can't touch physically. Bhojanam, that the things that are necessary for us to have, to consume, right? Bhojanam particularly loosely means food, but food you eat and it becomes a part of you also. So those things that are necessary for our growth is also behind this word bhojanam. Sreshtam, the very best, the superior quality of something. Sarvadhatam, that is equally everywhere. May it be equal, not just bountiful everywhere, but may it also be equally available to people. because we are facing various inequalities in facing what we are going through right now collectively. Turam, right, quickly, willingly, abundantly. Bhagasya, right, elevated, most high. That one who is most high, most elevated, we dhimahi, meditate, contemplate, imbibe. So it's a call for the divine to sustain um, not just maintenance, but things that are necessary and may be done to the best ability derived from light that is abundant for people quickly and equally everywhere. So I'm going to do this chant 3 times to get us going. Tat savitur mahe vayam devasya bhojanam Sreshtam sarvadatamam turam bhagasya dhimahi tatsavitur mahe vayam devasya bhojanam Sreshtam sarvadatamam turam bhagasya dhimahi Tatsavitur vayam devasya bhojanam Sreshtham sarvadatamam turam bhagasya dhimahi. So, getting into some of the theory, I think I've got 3 slides of theory and 3 slides of charts. Um, and I'm not sure what level people are coming to, uh, you know, in the audience here. So I've changed a lot of things since I first made the presentation. So in Vedic astrology, there are a lot of major cycles. The time scales are quite incomprehensible to us. And so instead of taking it from the root down to where we are, I wanted to just focus on one method or technique of looking at a major cycle. And again, if you are practicing other forms of Vedic astrology, you may or may not have heard of this. And you may know other cycles as well that are applicable. But I found that this technique gave me one chart that gives me proper context for everything. And so I like that because we like efficiency when we do things. And if we have more time, we can go into more detail, etc., and explore other additional techniques. So just some context here. You can see this picture of a horned large fish that is pulling some people on a boat across a very tumultuous ocean. And in Vedic astrology, this has to do with a very big mythological story about the end of a certain era, the end of times, what we call pralaya, generally speaking. Okay, various definitions of pralaya also, but just keeping it just keeping it simple. And here on the boat are what we call the rishis, or the progenitors of um, the races of human beings. And this great fish is taking them to safety, and they are also carrying the knowledge of the ages, ancient knowledge and wisdom with them that is being preserved. This is referred to as the Matsya Avatara in Vedic understanding, the fish incarnation. And, there's some similar type of stories in other canons of ancient knowledge in esoterica. So this power of this Ketu, the south node of the moon, that is here indicated by this incarnation, um, appears at the time of pralaya, a cosmic dissolution. And the mythology of the avatara Basically, he appears to a king, okay, towards the end of an era, giving him indications of that approaching and the beginning of the next. And in short, to summarize, when the South Node goes into sidereal Pisces, transiting in that sidereal Pisces as a sign itself carries an energy of this nature. And that has to do with the Ketu co-rulership of the sign together with Jupiter. So there's a lot more to this in terms of parampara, ancient esoteric traditions and the survival of knowledge, transmission of knowledge in various spiritual paths and forms, but also a lot to do with conception, all right, which is also a kind of transmission into the tumultuous waters of the womb. So there's a lot going on with this mythology. Let me just check the chat. Okay, good. So, so going to the second part of it, so building on that. So first we're going to look at times in history where the South Node was transiting sidereal Pisces, where this energy is very strong, it's ending and beginning sort of crux time. And to that, we are going to add the next part of the puzzle. And this is the two grahas or planets, Guru and Shani, or Jupiter and Saturn, respectively, to use the more familiar English words. And their conjunction, I've been taught, is called Brahma Yoga. And it indicates a creative pulse in the world for a specific purpose, an unfoldment of an ideational, creational thought of the divine that is manifesting. All right. So it's got a creative pulse. It's sort of pregnant with creative meaning in that way, in various ways, not all, for good or bad, comfortable or uncomfortable as it may be, but these are unfolding cycles in that way. Jupiter cycles actually in Jyotish are studied separately in a lot more detail as Bharaspatya Yugas, which I'm not going to go into, but it is there if you want to research more about it. The alignment of the Saturn cycle with it, with Jupiter cycle in particular, is studied for creative pulse because Saturn also indicates, sort of ancient karmic seeds typified by Brahma, which is the deified notion of the ancient creative Brahma. There's various ways to describe that. I'm just keeping it also very simple because Vedic cosmology is complex. So is everyone with me at this point? Just say yes or put a yes in the chat box so I know that you are following along.
Yes.
Oh,
Nathan, why did you bring up Ketu in Pisces? Because is that something because the nodes are now in Sag? Just if you could explain that.
I'm not talking about current yet. I'm talking about generally how we identify key, points in humanity's history when there's major shifts happening.
Thank you.
But obviously, according to sidereal, it's in Scorpio, Ketu, right?
Yes,
at the moment.
At the moment. Yeah. So we're coming to the at the moment part. We will get to that. Yeah. So basically, Ketu in sidereal Pisces is an important marker for a ending beginning time. To that, we are adding the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction because it is then more powerful or prominently showing a creative impulse that is coinciding with a moment of ending beginning as well. So someone has their audio on. Could you please?
Yeah. Oh, Theo, just wanted to say chat has been disabled, so we can't message you.
Oh, I see. All right. It's probably some setting. So if you have a question, when we take a break, You can ask me, or if something is really pressing to you, okay, I will answer it. Just unmute yourself and say it if it is relevant to what I'm talking about. All right. So the formative or creative water sign is Cancer, which corresponds to the blood. It has a resonance with the blood and also the breathing process. The symbiosis between the heart and the lungs is very resonant with the sort of throbbing vibe of Cancer as a sign. The blood in the body, and the pulse of the blood in the body, and the pulses of the ocean, the water in the body carrying all sorts of mixtures in the blood, just as the ocean does carry mixtures of components as well that are necessary for life. Jupiter, the major benefic supporting life, it is called Jiva, given the special status of Jiva in Jyotish, has its exaltation in the sign of Cancer, while Saturn is responsible for physical deterioration through the power of Capricorn and mental deterioration through the sign of Aquarius. All right, so they're coming together as a conjunction. Jupiter, you can sort of think as this inhalation. Think about this creative principle, this Brahma that is breathing in, all right, and his exhalation, okay, as the Jupiter-Saturn dance that is happening. And their conjunction is like a retention of breath. It is like a meditation where everything is still, because it itself is receiving from higher up to manifest and channel. All right. It's like when you're in deep meditation or in samadhi, in the breathless sort of states of awareness, right? So this is one way that we can sort of see this breathing in, breathing out, this dance of Brahma, which is the creative archetype of the localized system. All right. Now, when we put these two together, those times in history when Ketu was in sidereal Pisces and there was a Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, that is the one method of creating a chart, which I'm just calling an era chart for the sake of not having too many Sanskrit words. So the joining of these two periods roughly happens every 300 years. There are some notable exceptions. So from 270 years to 360 years, it sort of varies, but it's roughly about 300 years on average. Now, curiously, each era, as far back as I could research, so I must point out that in this presentation, all I had learned was Ketu in sidereal Pisces and the bringing of together of the Brahma Yoga, Saturn-Jupiter conjunction. Everything else from now on in this presentation is purely research, my research, which I'm presenting to you. So what I found in that the areas that I went back to research showed an evolution in the concept of money. Now, obviously, there are so many other things that are happening in humanity, okay, not just money, evolution, consciousness, but it is one of the ones that we can most easily track, okay, and see, because, people here care about money. So this, one of these periods, 300-year periods, was from 1306 to 1643, BCE. I mean, sorry, AD, the Common Era, right? And in this period, and the beginning of the period is important because it's the beginning, it's the starting. It shows the signs of what will dominate. And at the beginning of the 1300s, you just had the Third Crusade ending which was a big movement from West imposing itself onto the East, or what we now call Middle East, but it was East as far as the Western world was concerned at the time. And they began, the Knights Templar specifically, began the system of bills of exchange, where you could say, and it wasn't yet money, but currency as we know it. But what they did have was, okay, I'm leaving, Berlin, and I'm sort of getting a note, bill of exchange for my one donkey and two wheelbarrows or something. And I take that piece of paper, and when I get to Jerusalem, someone over there is going to give me a donkey and a two wheelbarrows, right? Instead of carrying my donkey and wheelbarrows with me on the long journey. This was beginning a new concept in the world that was not there before. The system of bills of exchange, which later, 200 years later, by the way, the Knights Templar were sort of put down in 1312, shortly after this major period began, interestingly enough. But they were the catalysts, from the 1280s, starting to build this thing into the world. And so because they were also a vehicle that was moving, in terms of that time, it was a global thing, okay? In terms of the known world, at least from a Western point of view, bills of exchange quickly became the thing to use, such that by the time we come to the Renaissance, at least of course, the European Renaissance, in the 1500s, you have these major families, who call themselves bankers, but not in the way we know banking today. The Medicis and the Salviatis, etc., these major banking families, they were largely dealing in bills of exchange and what they called promissory notes. Because I'm promising something with a note I'm carrying. I'm carrying a note that promises me access to something when I get somewhere else. All right. This was new, a new concept of thought in the mind, in the collective human consciousness that took root in this period. It began in the 1300s and it built up to a peak in the late 1400s and 1500s. And then it changed by the time, 1600s, middle of 17th century came along. Because, of course, everything has a start, a peak, and a resolution phase. And the next period was 1643 to 1921. This was really the birth of banking as we know it. No, not as we know it, but banking as a concept with money and lending. And it's not just bills of exchange anymore. And interestingly, in 1640, just on the cusp of this period beginning, you had King Charles in England basically taking a forced loan. That's a nice way of saying that he marched troops into the mint of the kingdom and took over the money stores that were there for himself. He had his own justifications at the time, but people, everyone in the merchant class saw this as a major, problem. And what they started doing is that they started putting their money, storing their money, not with the mint, but with other goldsmiths, because they had the most secure kind of locks and all that. Okay. And that is different. That started the whole banks now being able to hold money, hold your money in exchange for various financial products. That was not what a bill of exchange was, right? This was, I'm keeping your money so you can do whatever you want with a banking note I'm giving you. And my bank stamp is on that note that says, my bank allows you to go to another city and get something. The problem with this was every bank had its own notes. So if you had, you put your money into a bank in London, all right, and you travel to South, and that bank gave you a note saying, so and so has deposited X amount of money with us. We are guaranteeing that amount. Come and claim it whenever you have time. All right. You now travel to, let's say, Germany, which is a big journey in those days. You travel to Germany and you go to Berlin and say, okay, I want to purchase bread and milk. And they say, okay, well, firstly, your bank is too far away for us. We're going to charge you 30% commission on that because we have to now pay someone to go to London and get your money physically. So we may accept your notes, but we're going to charge you a huge commission. Or we're going to say, no, your bank note from England is not acceptable in this city. So it was a huge problem for people traveling around. Multiple banking notes floating around. You can imagine what it did to inflation and the macroeconomics, dynamics. Until England had this great idea in 1694 to found a national bank for the first time in human history. The Bank of England was founded in 1694. And that said, okay, all your little banks in different cities around the country, it's fine. Your little banking notes will phase out in 5 years' time. And the banking note of the Bank of England will be the replacement for everyone. And you see the birth of a paper money currency beginning here, a nationalized, paper money currency linked to nationhood starting to take form here, right? And it's within 50 years of this period beginning. You saw in the 1700s, you had a lot of, paper currency and things emerging in more sort of obvious ways, of course, because as the period is stabilizing and coming to its peak phase, that form, I'm using money as an example here to show you how these cycles work. Now, I've highlighted here 1870s. Let me just see, no one else is trying to join in. Okay, great. 1870s, because that was the middle of this period from 1643 to 1921. The 1870s was the real middle of that period. So it is the peak. It is the peak of that period. In the peak of these periods, what we find, or what I found, was major movements forward in collective thinking in terms of technology, in forming nations and new players coming into the field, old countries and nations collapsing, new ones taking shape. By this time at the peak, it's a really very creative, you can see the full manifestation of the intention that was in the creative seed. So, for example, in the 1870s, and you may laugh and think this is funny, but it's true. We had, this was towards the end of the Franco-Prussian War, or in the midst of it. I can't really remember, because it sort of dragged down in Russia a bit. The Franco-Prussian War, because you had France and you had Prussia at that time. Okay, but after the Franco-Prussia War, there was a huge movement to unify these German states all over the place. So what happened after the Franco-Prussia War is that you had France and Germany as we know them today. They were not there as governmental systems of nationhood before that. And France and Germany played a very important role at the beginning of our present period with World War, at the end of that period in 1914, 1918, France and Germany, drama happened in World War I, which ended that period, right? So we also had the peak of the British Empire at the time. This was after Queen Victoria had taken over India and became Empress of India and blah, blah, right? 1860, I think she took over from the East India Company officially. So, this was the peak of the British sort of idea around the world. In South Africa, we had a lot of settlements and various Anglo local wars happening after this period. So, but technologically in the 1870s, you also had the first modern analog computer. You had the first telephone. You had the first phonograph. You had the first headphone jack. And you had the first light bulb. All in that time. You think these are modern implements. So the question is, in our current cycle, we have not yet reached the creative peak. A lot of these technologies that we have today are just more convenient permutations of these things that were invented in the 1870s. All right, more advanced, more complicated, connect to a cloud, but the idea is the same. The creative idea is the same, hasn't changed that much. So that's very interesting. And now when we come to, finally now, this is one meaning my context, coming to the period we are in right now, from 1921 to 2219, so we can all calm down about apocalypse and end of the world, because it just doesn't happen, all right? The world we know may be ending. That is an apocalypse we are carrying and projecting onto the world. But Mother Nature knows what she's doing, all right? And in each cycle, the world evolves and humanity is provided a lot of the things it needs to move forward and do the things it needs to do creatively. So this is the current cycle we are in, so the digitization of credit, the ending of monarchies has happened as well. Virtual currency has also showed up, you see, in this time. Very interesting, very interesting. So we're not at the peak yet. So we can also just calm down, right? This pressure that collectively humanity is carrying to find solutions now, before 2020, it's not going to happen. There are creative births, people that are being born right now that in 20 years time will invent the new thing that is a solution going forward. So we are in the strange twilight zone, which I'm going to demonstrate to you here now. So because it's a roughly 300-year period. Okay, any questions about so far what I've done? All right. Great, that means it's easy to understand. So right now, because it's a 300-year period, roughly, we can split it into roughly 100-year segments to identify the beginning, peak, and dissolution phases, respectively. It makes it very easy to study history this way. So the first 100 years, roughly, from 1921 to 2020, 2021, the thing has emerged. The new seeds have been put in place. So we are at the cusp between the creation phase and the integration 100 years. Consolidation 100 years, which will come next, which are beginning now. And so we all feel like, oh, we're at the cusp of something big. And it's true, all right? But it's not as doom and gloom as we think all the time. Yes, as with the previous phase, you had all wars going on, and these things happen. These things are there. Because, the moon has two sides. But life moves on also. So we should, while we are going through a squeeze, and we'll come to why we are specifically going through a squeeze, we will do some detail on that. we should also bear in mind that the bigger picture is also creatively purposeful and meaningful for life. And our peak will be from 2065 to 2075, roughly. Isn't that interesting? So about 50 years from now, 40 to 50 years from now, when your children or their grandchildren are running the world, they will produce creatively the will of Brahma for this cycle. All right. So it's coming. It's in the works right now. We are now going to be in a trial and error period. Okay, while we try these things, revise, go back, change the plan, move forward, right? And then it will happen at that time. And then the dissolution phase will happen after that, or resolution. Okay. Any questions? This ends the theory part of the presentation. So you should get this, understand it. All right. This is just my research that I'm sharing with you. Okay, great. So here's an example of looking at the current era from, not the whole era, because I don't want to go on forever, but you can see we're starting the conjunction that happened in 1921 of Saturn and Jupiter happened in sidereal Virgo, while Ketu was in sidereal Pisces. That kicked off the whole thing. All right, the first one since the last. And so the whole evolution of this 300 years is happening through Virgo, is a refinement of Virgo in the broader collective consciousness, which is consumerism, good and bad, business, good and bad, resource yield, good and bad, resource access, good and bad. Resources also means physical, okay? Because, the physical will be a resource, genetics and things like that. Physical body resource. Sciences related to all the above things. Because Virgo can be quite analytical also. But Virgo is a very strongly business-oriented sign in Vedic astrology. All right. Mercury is a planet that controls sort of, is an archetype for this. Okay. Exchange and supply demand dynamics, etc. So Capricorn in Vedic astrology, remember, is physical deterioration first. There'll be other things there like long-standing industries like coal, mining, construction also fall under Capricorn, because generally people who work in those industries for a very long time, the physical bodies have some long-term problem. All right. Toil and trouble. This is the Capricorn thing. So Capricorn in Vedic astrology is not about business per se. I just wanted to make a distinction for the Western astrologers in the audience. So you can see that we transitioned from fire-earth combinations, and we have a big sort of chunk of earth, Capricorn, Virgo, Taurus, Capricorn, 2020 to 2100. You can see that. Very strong earth changes. And then we're transitioning after that into air, earth. So, space travel, moving, the air element in Vedic astrology is about movement, right? Transportation, and also sort of all kinds of, disturbances in a broad sort of category. Movement comes from a disturbance. Why do you move? Why do you communicate? Because there's a disturbance in your thinking. So the root of communication and movement is the third house, etc. Third house, it has that sort of underlying restlessness about it also. But you can see that where we had Aries, which is the working sign of Mars, which is to fight, we were at the peak of, we had some really important wars happening in the world. at the time. Now we have transitioned from Capricorn Ketu from the last era to Capricorn ruling the conjunction, while Ketu is in Scorpio for the next, the next 40 years. The conjunctions will be having Ketu in Scorpio. So cybersecurity, protection of things unseen, protection of the life force, genetics, these underlying things are going to come into question. And governments and people and leaders that have control of those things will have power. And so the concern with the people, because Ketu eclipses the moon, all right, the concerns with the people are going to be about these things. All right. Privacy is not something we have anymore, really, and we're just at the beginning of it. And we can see that. And that's what the Western astrologers are calling Aquarius. All right. It's these underlying movements and control under the carpet, under the hood. We need oversight on those. Do we have oversight on those? And so the next 20 years, think about Capricorn. Obviously, Capricorn, we're all going through a bodily drama at the moment, physically, and experiencing the restriction. Saturn, Ketu, when they come together, usually, is quite a caged type of situation, which we are all in. And so this is typifying this time where the world is going to come out of this, work very hard to come out of this sort of caged condition. And that will be the impetus for all the analysis and the science is expanding in the next phase of Virgo, etc. All right. And like we said, in the 2065 to 2075, the financial peak, new thing is going to settle. And coincidentally, that will be a Taurus period. Okay. So when we come to interspace movement and all that human beings, we can really talk about the air-earth transition, which will begin from 2100 onwards. All right. Then we can really start to talk about, okay, now there may be human beings first trying to stay on Mars and etc. But I also want to say that what is happening is that a lot of the things to do with the physical are becoming inorganic and artificial to us. We eat artificial food, not non-natural food. The body develops various cancers because the physical body is resonant with the moon. And so the moon doesn't like these things that are not natural. But if we want humanity to get to a point where we can travel between planets without the physical body being a limitation in its organic state, the human body has to or will take on more inorganic aspects. Oh, when I'm going to travel to my Mars property, one day I'm going to use my artificial organs. Because otherwise space travel is horrendously taxing on the physical body. The frequencies out there, our bodies can't handle. Our brain gets affected. So the aircrafts have to be kept at a certain frequency of Earth. Earth has its own frequency for those astronauts to be okay up there, psychologically and mentally. So there's all these things that are going to be emerging. And so what we now are seeing as, oh no, that's inorganic and that's bad for us and that's horrible and whatever. Yes, it is for the organic part of things. But they are part of evolution, all right? You're going to attach things to the body and make it do more things. What we're seeing in all these movies, Marvel movies and cyborg people, whatever is sci-fi becomes reality eventually because it's born out of the mind. So we are moving slowly in that direction. So it's, yes, in our short-term perspective and view of our little life of 80 years or whatever, it's bad. It's not good for our organic life. So what I'm saying to my clients and, to your children and your grandchildren, it's important because they will be the ones to bring the solutions for the world. So be more understanding of them. They don't want to do things the old way because they need to find new solutions. The old ways are not providing new solutions. But it's also good, maybe record your organic life for them, because who knows, in the 2100s, they might not know what walking out into a park feels like. You know, it'll be very different if the body evolves also. So those are all, speculations, obviously, but just a point of coming to calmness. Because this hysteria I'm seeing online is a bit sort of premature. Any questions about that? All right, so this is what the charts look like. And here's the chart. You can see 9th of September, 1921. And I've said it for Washington, D.C., but it doesn't really matter. You said it for different capital cities in the world if you want to do further analysis per country, etc. But I'm not going to do that here because, one, it's a free recording, and two, it is time dependent. But for those of you who want to explore more, you can take this information and look at it all over the world. What's important here, I just wanted to show you, okay, the chart. Let me use an annotation tool so you can maybe see me pointing at things. Okay, you should be able to see the red dot. So this is the chart style, okay, in Eastern Indian format. This is the signs that are fixed. Oh, the connection is very slow. Let me just use the mouse. So Aries, Taurus, Gemini, etc., all the way to Pisces in an anti-clockwise movement. It is fixed. Those are always the signs because we are using a fixed zodiac, relatively fixed zodiac, okay? And what changes is the ascendant. And then you read the houses relative to that. And in this case, we are using the whole sign as the house. Okay, just for simplicity. I've also got the sidereal Western chart up here with the glyphs of the planets for those of you who are not used to just using letters, okay, coming from a Western background, just to get a sense of the chart as well. But the most important thing I'm going to cover are the placements, okay? I'm going to come back to this chart and look at it with the individual periods specifically leading up to where we are now and where we're going. But I want to highlight to you that over here, you can see there's a first column. For those of you who are not familiar, this is just the normal generic sort of timing system called Vimshotri, which is nakshatra based. And the first column are what we call major periods or Mahadasha. And the second column, which are sub-periods to that, are called Antardasha. So major period, sub-period, those are the words I'm going to use. So you know what I'm referring to. And I'm using all English names here, so you should be able to follow. But I wanted to take, so for example, just to illustrate to you how this one chart can be used really well, I want to take the Ketu sub-periods and illustrate to you how they show really an evolution of that idea from major period to major period to major period. All right. If, for example, you can see there's a Venus Ketu period here from June 1944 to August 1945. There's a Sun Ketu period in 1950s. There's a Moon Ketu period down here, 1958, 1959. Okay, so I'm going to just extract those and demonstrate to you the creation evolution concept. So Ketu indicates, amongst other things, micro nanotechnology, small things that require detail, the unseen world. So I'm going to show you this. So this first Ketu sub-period was in 1944, 1945. And we had the first electronic digital programmable computer, Colossus. In the second Ketu sub-period, which was in 1950, we had the first commercially available computers, not for generate people, but for, government usage. Mark I and Ferranti Mark I. Ferranti, one of the creators. In the subsequent Moon Ketu period, 1958, 1959, we had the first integrated circuits and basically the birth of modern circuitry happening. In the Mars Ketu period, 1966, you had the first silicon, what they called at the time self-aligned circuit, which was a critical leap in moving towards chip technology, which is a huge deal for modern computing. In the Rahu Ketu subperiod, 1979-1980, we had the first mass-produced personal computers becoming mainstream. Actually, it was from 1975 to 1980. So Apple I and IBM and all these other people released their first versions, okay? Computers, personal computers. And you know how big of a deal that is for us. Obviously, it's a nodal connection. Then we have Jupiter Ketu in 1993, 1994. This was when one of the first Windows operating softwares was released. How interesting. That's also a huge deal. Amazon was founded. Flash technology with SanDisk was founded. And Intel released its first microprocessor. Huge, as you would expect with Jupiter Ketu. These have huge implications. Actually, every one of these. But you can see there's an evolution in just the Ketu periods that we're looking at. Saturn Ketu, 2008, 2009. The first Apple iPhone was released, I think, in 2007. Amazon Kindle, 2007. Hulu online streaming of video was launched, 2007. These are major things in our life today. Bitcoin, the paper written by the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto, was released online in 2008. And that has major implications. You see, when we come to the Jupiter major periods and the Saturn major periods, we're talking about big stuff now, because this is the root of the yoga. It is the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction. But I'm only using one chart from 1921. All right. That is also the elegance of Vedic astrology. One chart, one screen, and your work is being done. So our next Ketu sub-period, which is a Mercury Ketu one, is 2024-2025. So we'll show the next evolution of these ideas. I think that's very interesting, okay, from a positive point of view, okay? There's a lot of doom and gloom floating around nowadays. Yes, that also has negative financial implications for the world, okay? But we're going to find the financial solutions. Perhaps this is when the virtual currency is now formalized with the banking system. It's now integrated. It's becoming more mainstream. That's what my feeling about it is. And it's somehow linked to the computing, it's linked to this virtual, taking it further and further and further, all right, each time. Any questions about that? I just wanted to just take one topical example to show you. All right. Okay, no questions. That can mean one of two things. But
it's a bit quick.
Yes, it's
Any
very
questions?
quick.
And then 5 seconds later said, "Oh, no questions."
Yeah. But hopefully it will.
So if you did Rahu instead of Ketu, it would be very interesting.
Oh yeah. I have one example of Jupiter Rahu, which I'll come to when I talk about the periods. Okay. But yes, as you would expect. Yeah. So let's look at this chart in a bit more detail. Okay, I haven't done the Navamsha and all these other things because if this was a pure Vedic astrology hardcore audience, then we'd maybe go there and we had time. So this is the chart, and for you again, there's the circular chart there. And let's look first, where is the conjunction happening? It's happening in Virgo. And there's a lot of things happening in Virgo. All right. So Virgo, we said, is about business, the concept of yield. Jupiter is more about quality of things, maybe, and Mercury is concerned about the yield, the measure of something, right? That's important to Mercury, even in Western astrology. So the Jyotish is really using that principle through Virgo. Profit, because profit is all like a margin playing game, marginal, incremental sort of gains and things like that. Compound interest, all those Virgo little details are important in macro and microeconomics. But Virgo as a scientific sign, one of the scientific leaning signs, has something to do with the narrow focus and application of science towards earth things, towards physical things, towards material things and financial things, optimizing all these things in that way, so optimizing money, optimizing currency, optimizing food, optimizing business, optimizing supply, my product. And so it can be quite specialist in that way. Now, there's a lot happening. Besides Jupiter and Saturn, you also have Mercury and the north node of the moon, which we call Rahu in Vedic astrology, a very classically separatist kind of guy, all right, if I want to be nice about it, but very divisive, okay, and causing dissent and disruption. And it can be positive from a abstract thinking point of view, especially in the sign of Virgo. It's taking those mental mercurial faculties and seeing sort of beyond. So we call it the office of Rahu. It has other negative connotations as the office of Rahu, but it can help you break through, have scientific breakthroughs also in that way. I've seen that in charts of inventors, for example, Rahu in Virgo. So, but it is quite one of the big malefics in Vedic astrology. So the sattva, or the togetherness in the world, is being negatively impacted because it is together with the conjunction. All right. And Mercury is there in Virgo where he's exalted. So really we are going to see a upliftment, really the conceptual. Right? These are planets in their own signs. Yeah. At the mental, we are connecting to something and we are manifesting that in the form of some currency or something that affects business or is driven by business interest in the world. These are also occurring in the 10th sign from the moon, okay, which is very important also. So how we do work is also dramatically going to change. And this is what has happened since 1921. Actually, this is what has happened in 1921, since 1921. And you can see that I'll come to Venus and all that, but is this the slide I want to focus on right now? Yeah, so Rahu is a very sort of separatist character. So in the moon is in the 4th house from the conjunction. So we're talking about education, major changes, what's on the mind of people, right? The 4th house has to do with health, the health industries as well. And it's in the sign of Sagittarius, which is very strongly about showing direction in life, which we can call religion, all right? What is that, where you point into, what is pulling, or what is destiny? People have the seeking, so from 1921 to now, if you spoke to someone in 1921 about yoga, they may have just looked at you like the common person on the street would have been, what are you talking about? But so people, the globalization of the Sagittarius, of religious thinking, philosophies, making it more mainstream with the moon, on people's mind has happened. Globalization, Sagittarius also pushing that a bit. So in the Jupiter periods, I'm expecting to see the inhalation, the expansion, obviously. And in the Saturn period, I'm going to see the contraction, basically, or the pause, the limitation, right? And what's important to notice is that the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction happened, and we have something called planetary war in Vedic astrology, and Saturn is the one that is winning this war. It is higher in declination, etc. So the contraction period is going to make people stop and look and think, right? Saturn is winning the war. So even the Jupiter period, it won't be as expansive as it would normally be if Jupiter was winning the war, all right? But it'll still be expansive in its own right. So now we're just doing some very basic interpretations. Venus, the day lord, is important when we look at mundane charts in Vedic astrology. And this is Venus. This happened on a Venus day, a Friday. And, Venus is one of the important planets for protection of life force, okay? Venus is going to carry the energy of the sun for the day because it's the day of Venus at sunrise to the next sunrise. So Venus is going to have determination towards health matters, towards leadership matters for people generally in its periods. And Venus is in Cancer in this chart. So the monarchies were effective. Cancer is monarchy is a family system, right? Whereas Capricorn, who opposes that, is the democracies. No, you can't, your family and nepotism and all that can't be the rule of law and government anymore in the world. So that is changing and transforming because it is in the 8th house from the moon. All right. So that is going to really be a transformation point in the minds of people. That has to change. The leaders and the family is at the top of the ladder. That has really, really, especially World War I and World War II effectively sort of ended that in any sort of powerful way. So you can see in the, particularly for America, in the America chart, Venus is in the 2nd house. So it's determined towards available, accessible money. And let me see, where do I have it? If I go here, sorry, I have to go back. That slide disappeared. You can see here in the Venus moon period, all right, it's 2nd house from the ascendant, Venus, and 8th house from the moon. In the Venus moon period was the height of the Great Depression. And they had some relief in the Venus Jupiter period. They had the relief from the depression, the effects really were being seen by 1935. And then you can see Saturn having its face. The Venus-Saturn period was World War I breaking out. Because this great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn is happening in the 3rd house from Venus. All right. The ruler of the day is very important in looking at mundane charts. All right. 3rd house in Vedic astrology has to do with battle, conflict also in that way. Right. So the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in the 3rd house from Venus and the moon in the 6th house from Venus. All right. But the Lord of the day, Venus, its major period is going to be foundational. It's going to be seminal. If it happens before the major periods of Jupiter and Saturn, then it is setting things up. If it happens after that of Jupiter and Saturn, it is resolving everything. All right? Because it is the Lord of the day. And it's just one chart that I'm using. So I think I can go to the next. Um, oop, yes. So how are we on time? I think, yeah. So I will quickly do this. So this Rahu period that happened from 1968 to 1986, very much a lot of politicking was going on in the world. The Cold War was going on, the height of the Cold War, okay, Hunt for Red October, all those kind of movies. The James Bond movies were all about, Russian spy here, Russian thing there. In the collective consciousness, spies and espionage, these topics were very much prominent in the world because it was actually happening, okay, in this time. But also you had, manipulations of foreign governments, taking down of foreign governments. We think about in this 1970s, this first period, Rahu, the US involvement with Iran and that big fiasco that triggered the oil crisis later on. So really, breaking down of Sattva and sort of forcing business driven agenda. You also had a lot of expansion of pharmaceutical companies at this time, which is important as a Rahu sort of Aquarius sign indicator. And, this was post civil rights in the US specifically. Did people get what they thought they were getting? I think the Civil Rights Act was signed in 1966 or 1967. So a lot of those evils, were now turning around. Well, resisting to be turned around. You had KKK thing, associations going underground, etc. A lot of um, collective psychological anguish in the country. In South Africa, this was the most period of most civil unrest because of apartheid policies. Okay, this Rahu foreign ideology of cultures that came back, that was brought from Europe by a guy in the 1960s, and he propagated it, and it became public policy and government policy. Yes, I mean, apartheid officially started in, I think, 1949, 1950, but there they were not allowing people to intermarry amongst races, and everyone was classified. But in the 1960s, you really had it really, especially in this Rahu period, you had major disruption happening in the country, as well as the globalization of the agenda of the fight and struggle in South Africa. Rahu is also known for making things all around the world. So from that point of view, it was good because the struggle for freedom in South Africa became something that the UN and others took on as well. And then we had the Jupiter period, 1986 to 2002, and this was the expansion in the world. We had the internet and all these things being formalized and invented and put out there. Okay, CDs, DVDs, all of that. I mean, we had a lot of expansion happening. It's a lot of Virgo type of expansion happening in the world. We don't have angels falling from the sky and telling us prophecies, right? It's a Virgo Jupiter. So we had expansion in those things of physical daily implements, all right, that required technologies and forward of science. Also cloning and stuff. Some improvements were made there with the genetic understanding. Yeah, could you please keep your audio off? Okay, so that was the expansion phase. And you can see in the Jupiter Rahu period, we had 2001 happen. And actually it was a build up throughout the Jupiter period, bombing of embassies and etc. And I think, yeah, so 2001 changed the world. September 11, 2001. And Jupiter Rahu is classic breakdown of Sattva, big battle between togetherness, unity, and anti, all of that. Okay, terrorism, sort of activity. Jupiter Rahu is called Guru Chandal Yoga, which is infamous in Vedic astrology, but now you can understand why. It disrupted the sattva, the balance. It was a huge disruption in the world that we are still sort of going through. And it happened again in that period. Then we come to the Saturn major period, which we are at the end of now. And I'm coming to the now, all right? Because it's important to understand context. This is my point. And so this is the start of the contraction. And this is going to be very much stronger than the Jupiter period because Saturn is winning the war with Jupiter. There's a battle happening there, all right? But it's happening, and so the first period will show the signs, Saturn, from 2002 to 2005. And do you know what happened in that time? We had the first coronavirus in China in November 2002. How interesting. Just as this period began. And it lasted till I think middle of 2003. But since then bird flu, then something else flu, whatever. The mutations are going on, right? So it is interesting that in the first sub-period of Saturn, this is what was shown to the world. Okay, this is the contraction that's coming. Okay. And you had also oil crises and things happening, which I'm not going to go into, but I'm familiar with that because I used to work in the oil industry. The Jupiter period, just as a closing point, ending point of the Jupiter period, brought the freedom to South Africa. Okay, 1986 actually was the year when the ruling party of the apartheid regime started negotiations with the Black majority ANC movement for freedom. So that was interesting. And in Jupiter Saturn, which is a important period to look at for the world, because it's the two planets we're talking about, Jupiter, Saturn, that was when Nelson Mandela was released from prison. It's a big creative point for our country in South Africa that happened, okay? So Jupiter Ketu brought the freedom of the country in 1994. Typical of Ketu, impulse for freedom, especially with Jupiter. It was a very uplifting time for the country and hopeful time for the country. And then Saturn happened, and things changed. And so now coming to the present day, we are, I've talked about all of that. So the last thing I want to do is go into this Saturn-Jupiter period we're in more detail. The last, again, this is Saturn and Jupiter, right? The two big daddies we're talking about coming together. So now it's not Jupiter's major period and Saturn's smaller period. It's Saturn's major period and Jupiter's smaller period. So Saturn, who is winning the war, is really going to contract in this time. The squeeze is going to begin, take root, last, and dissolve in this period specifically. So I know Venus and the Moon help us, right? They can help us with sustaining life because they relate to the water element, which is very important for life, okay? And vitality of the physical in terms of health. So Jupiter, Saturn, Jupiter, Venus, there were all sorts of talks. Oh yeah, in the rumors about vaccines and all these things were going on in that period. A lot of people predicted, by June it'll be okay. And a lot of the hope is there. In this period, Saturn is having the dominance over Jupiter. So there's a lot of the hope that is there from Jupiter. But what Jupiter is doing here is saying to the global medical community, get yourself together, right? I'm giving you the money and the funding and all of this to sort out Saturn's drama that is providing disease into the world. I am Jupiter. It's my sub-period. I'm going to give you access to emergency funding, this funding, that funding. Get it sorted out, all right? And quicken all those processes. So that is changing how vaccines are even researched and done for the future. And maybe okay, so I'm jumping ahead of myself. Saturn, Jupiter, Moon is the next positive time. Okay. That's the one we're in right now. 15th of November 2020 is when it began. And interestingly, on the 9th of November, a few days before, the first vaccine with 90% effectiveness was announced by the BBC in the UK. So the moon is trying. I mean, we are in this period now from November to January. All the talk is about vaccine, this vaccine, that. The moon is trying because moon and Jupiter have an interesting connection to each other, right? Jupiter is trying to support life, and moon is the sign that Jupiter is exalted in. So they're going to try, okay, but Saturn is still ruling the time. So, you can't rush things. Take it slow. There are important checks to be done, etc., which we are all aware of. So really, and then we get Saturn, Jupiter, Rahu, and okay. So what I'm saying is that this squeeze we are in is with us until August next year. So vaccines and things like that, which the moon Jupiter are trying to do right now, it's premature. Saturn is still ruling the time. The long-term effects, the Saturn effects, are not known. All right. And so Saturn in Virgo has a big sort of creation problem. All right. Saturn in Virgo in Vedic astrology is known as a dosha. Okay. Things are still not okay there physically. And Saturn typically shows long-term problems that result long-term effects. So Saturn in a positive way is saying, no, you have these vaccines, they're working for now because Jupiter Moon are helping you, but long-term, guys, long-term, we're not sure about that yet. So by middle of next year, August next year, maybe the Saturn period will be finished. Mercury is taking over. And what we'll find is that we are going to be having, an easing up slowly of the squeeze we are in and the vaccine story clearing up, etc., especially Mercury, Venus, Mercury, Moon. All right. I mean, really expecting, when we get to those times, vaccine with long-term sort of surety is more on the cards. All right. That's my view. But this Mercury, Ketu, and Mercury period is disturbing from a financial point of view, because in the Navamsha chart, the chart of destiny, Mercury is actually debilitated. Okay, and that's a big deal, right? So from that is maybe the challenging aspect of next year, is that we are in a contraction physically that we are experiencing, and some of us, many of us, also financially, because our long-term savings and sureties and insurance, these typically Saturn things, are what is also contracting. In South Africa, we have the government that is stealing funds from people's pension, stealing funds from insurance companies. These big insurance companies in South Africa, are they going to survive? Because if they collapse, we have a problem. The grant system is going to have a problem. So what we find happening by 2021 August is, as you know, Jupiter Rahu is going to be disruptive. So from March to August, we should pay attention to what these leaders are doing with the financial things. Are they running out of money? Are they running out of subsistence, subsidies for people and businesses? What is going on there? Because we're entering a big Mercury period, which we know is setting us up for 2024, 2025, Mercury Ketu. And for me, that means that whatever we go through in the Mercury period will be the final last straw on the camel's back for the current financial system, where people actually finally realize, you know what, guys, the way we've been doing this financial system propping up is no longer working. Here we have this virtual currency thing that is now huge. Maybe we should try to integrate that and use that as a support. So the necessity of the financial squeeze, which will happen in this Mercury Mercury period, will push people to innovate, just like the Saturn Jupiter's push people to innovate medically. The Mercury period will, because it's having a lot of Rahu effects, will push people to innovate the financial system, the education system, the corporate structure system, because those are also the things that needed to change: education, work, etc. All right. And I think South Africa, okay, for us it's really financial, okay, foreign investment, etc., selling the resources to foreign countries. It's been the country's history since foundation. Foreign powers have more hands in our pie. The government changes, but that dynamic doesn't change for the country of South Africa. We hope that we will be doing it better, all right, going forward. There was more I wanted to say about South Africa, but I think we are on time or out of time. If there are any questions, please ask it. I would first, however, like to finish with this peace prayer, very short one, for all of us, and to send good vibes out into the world. Om Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Thank you for attending, and I hope it was interesting. I had individual charts for the individual years and things that I wanted to do, but I think that will be it for now.
Round 2 sometime next week. Thanks, Theo. Thanks,
Yeah.
Nathan.
Thank you, Theo.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very interesting.
Thank you so much.
I have tried Vimshottari Dasha from other conjunctions, and it works very well.
Yes. I would like to talk to you about
very
that.
good.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Theo.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Theo.
Thank
Theo,
you so
just a
much.
question.
Yes.
Theo, just a question. I want to ask you, sorry, I didn't see clearly because I'm looking from my phone, watching from my phone. The 1918, the Black Plague, what was the dasha then?
1918.
What were we running? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, not
So
the
that
World
was
War II Jupiter.
Yeah, it was before our current era started.
Was it Jupiter Saturn?
I'll have to check in the Vimshottari and let you know, but it was part of the destruction ending of the last period, because the current one started in 1921. So World War I was part of the ending of the previous cycle. But specifically the dashas, I can look at that and let you know. I have the charts.
Because it would be interesting to see the connection, because it's yet again another world. It's a pandemic. You know what I mean? Where we haven't actually had a proper pandemic since then.
At this sort of scale. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. I mean, I will look at that and let you know.
That would be great. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks, Theo.
Thanks for bringing it up.
You know what was interesting when you were looking at 91? I looked at I know our old South African chart because I like working off that one. And because it was that Jupiter period you were talking about, the South African chart is Pisces rising with Sagittarius on the 10th house. So it's very much a Jupiterian chart.
Yes, yeah. And Jupiter gave the freedom. Yeah.
From little I understand of this, Nathan, but I got a bit.
Yeah. And everyone's going to get the recording. So, if you're bored on Christmas, Boxing Day and things, you can look at it again. But what I want to emphasize was one chart, the whole period. Because context is important. A lot of times astrologers, we look at mini charts, right? Chart of the year, chart of the whatever conjunction, 20-year epoch. And then we say maybe larger things than we need to. But if we look at the charts of bigger cycles first, we know the context within which to look at, a 20-year valid chart, etc., like that. So I hope everyone sort of feels a bit calmer about where we're going. There is going to be financial contraction, as you can see, particularly second half of next year. I think whichever astrology you're doing, you are saying that and seeing that in various ways, taking shape and form. And so it's good not to just ignore that, because it is a real thing. But it is necessary for us for the people high up, for the world to change financial systems, the big people who have big money, it has to hit their pockets for them to feel it, unfortunately, before they want to move things and secure it. So we need to really look at our finances going into the next year and make sure that we have those emergency funds. We are not doing reactionary investing and fluid market movements, but we are keeping our stable funds secure.
Which is really interesting when you talk about the stable fund security and stuff. I mean, I think Laurie and I were chatting about the whole Saturn square Uranus that's coming up in the South African U chart, and that also points to this whole financial instability as well, because it's got quite a few hits. And what's more is that I think when Mars comes there, it's going to heat up when Mars conjuncts Uranus and that square hits off. I mean, you're looking at a huge financial upset, and this whole understanding of what is our true monetary value and what will bring the stability. So it's going to be interesting to see. I'm worried about the banks, the
banks are going to change. The banks have to survive.
But I'm worried about all of us right now, the majority of South Africans have their money in banks. If they're going to, do you know what I mean? And what that will mean. I mean, where do we put our money? What other options do we have for good, solid investments? And I think for those of us that do save, that are working, because we've got the foresight of astrology or whatever else to know what's coming, and you're saving your money, but where is it safe to keep? Do you know what I mean?
So, we would look at the great conjunction from Mercury's point of view and look at the positive houses from Mercury. Yeah. And we can see, well, firstly, there's Capricorn, which is the fifth house, and then using Vedic astrology principles here. The fifth house is Capricorn with Venus looking at it. So that's looking at entertainment industry. We're looking at especially health care industry. So people who are going to invest in businesses that are building, because Capricorn is construction, building healthcare, new hospitals, better hospitals, more of these long-term facilities, are going to benefit and grow. And the other trine sign is Taurus. So people that are working towards food security, which is going to be a big thing. Going
and forward. Land security as well, because I mean it's also the land. So besides, I mean, what I mentioned as well is that I think in terms of the land appropriation and now suddenly the urgency, because that's Uranus's urgency of restructuring the land and ownership of the land, and in a way that's not going to result in violence, but finding the best way possible with that,
It is going to shake things up. It might not be violence in the country, because in the chart of South Africa, you can see this great conjunction, this epoch chart, 1921 for Pretoria, has a Leo rising with Mars and Sun in it. And Mars rules the fourth house, which is coincidentally Scorpionic. And now that Ketu is transiting Scorpio, this land thing is going to be, the fourth house is land, right? The land thing is going to be important. And Mars in Vedic astrology rules land and property, because that's what people fight about forever. So that ruler of the fourth house has come to the ascendant, and it's Mars with the Sun. So it's going to cause a crisis in leadership. And so a leader who is Martian, who wears red, who shouts,
let's hope not. No,
they are going to instigate a crisis in the leadership. So the ruling party, archetypally here by the first house and the Sun, is going to come under pressure from Mars running around outside and, throwing, fire into the house, so to speak. And that's what we're seeing building up in South Africa in terms of political party. People think the EFF is a joke. It's not a joke. Mars is ruling the time for South Africa. It's in the ascendant. Mars will have power too. And our country has always gone through this phase of unrest, freedom, since 1650 something. It's always been that way with Mars in our country's history. So specifically here, I would say that the Mars issue is going to trigger aggression tactics and sudden dynamics that play out in the leadership. So I would hope that Cyril Ramaphosa has good security. I would hope that his close advisors are on his side. Anybody in his close advisor that seems to be a bit of an aggressor is going to come into alliance with the Mars outside person. And the ANC itself might rupture and have a civil war within itself. So I think that those dynamics are going to become more sort of emphasized going forward, coming up, because Saturn exalts Mars, right? So that is the time we are in. So the labor unions, the labor force, they are supplying and supporting the Mars party, if I want to put it that way. So our leaders, if they want to actually survive this process, they cannot talk nice. They cannot talk educated. They have to talk Mars, short, to the point, and strong.
Which is also interesting because I suppose Mars could also be very representative of the ANC Youth League, yes, which is comprised of a lot of young men. Yeah. I think, whereas maybe I speak under correction, but I definitely think that's where the rupture will happen between the Youth League and.
And that's been a classic example, right? That's been happening in our politics since the 60s, right? Mandela didn't like them controversies where then ANC didn't like the ANC Youth League, because they were aggressors in those younger Mars type organizations. Okay, because Mars is younger than the sun. So the sun is the king and Mars is the people that have the pushing power. So these dynamics are coming to the fore in South Africa, but it's in the 12th house from Mercury. So the trigger is going to be a lot of the financial. The reason for them coming and getting more voice is that the money, the financial issue, and the land issue, because it's a Mars. So the whole thing about, Mars, the significance of land and Mercury are not seeing each other in this chart. And that's the nature of the government. They don't know what they do. How is remuneration going to happen? How is it going to play out? How is it going to affect business? This is all things that they haven't really detailed sufficiently, which is just going to be ammunition for the opposition, Mars opposition. They will be the only standing opposition. All the other ones are ineffectual.
So basically, we need to invest in Netflix. And just so you all know, I'm in the film industry. So if you want to invest in one of my projects, you're welcome to.
There you go. The Mars person has spoken. So Taurus is good and Capricorn is good. Those archetypes are supported by this conjunction.
But just in the South African Vedic chart, is the 9th house ruled by Venus? Because I'm really quite interested to also know what's going to happen with our education system.
The Vedic education is seen in the 4th house in Vedic astrology, not the 9th house. So in the chart of South Africa, depending which one you use, assuming if I take the Capricorn rising one, which would be Aquarius for you, so the 1994 midnight chart, let's say, that is Capricorn rising. And this Virgo is the 9th house and Aries is the 4th house. So education, we had a lot of student protests and things like that building up as well since 2015, 2016 because of Saturn problem, mining issue, ownership, all that. So that Marikana issue, which came through the students. Remember, 1960, the Sharpeville, was it 1960, the Sharpeville massacre?
Americana wasn't as a result of students; they were the result of the miners.
Yeah, that was the Saturn side of this conjunction, right? And the Jupiter side of the conjunction has been the student protests as well. And in South Africa's history, I think the 1960 Sharpeville massacre was also students, right?
Yes, it was students, yes.
So you can see the fourth house of the chart of the country is Aries, right?
Yes, which is the
Capricorn rising, yes, and education as well. So a lot of what has happened recently with Marikana, what has happened recently with the student protests, they're not just haven't just disappeared. You know, it's not something that, and look how the leadership handled it at the time. They handled it horribly.
Well, Cyril was responsible for Marikana. It was his mind. So.
In the student crisis, you know, they were jeering at the minister on the street or whatever, I remember vaguely. So, because they took it as a joke. It's not a joke. It's definitely not a joke, because this is ammunition for the opposition. And there's one Mars opposition party that is going to make use of them. You know, they wear red and run around. So we need to, the major middle-class business owners need to support the ANC, but they need to know what is happening with the ANC leadership, because political instability is not good for business. So the ANC needs to really look at their leadership and the aggressors around them and get some protection in that regard.
You know what's interesting when you talk about all this financial and restriction and everything with the Saturn is many businesses that were ready to actually go over the seas, take their businesses there, move over, close down. They've stopped that. They're now trying to make do here. I actually do, I have a lot of businessmen clients in big businesses, and now the focus is how do we make it work here? That is the question. Yeah. So I think that sort of mindset with the situation internationally closing of borders might in a way work for positive in a way to South Africa, because businesses here now are thinking we actually have to do the hard work and invest in our very own country. Yes. And in a way, you know, I look at this square that we are seeing in modern. I don't see squares as such a major crisis. I see them as hard work. I see them as that you have to work a square. If you work a square, you get around that corner and you can be successful. If you don't, you'll crash.
Yeah, Mars requires action first. You've got to do, you know, theorizing Mercury time is over, actually, you know, also in the world. So leaders that are resonant with that type of language and that type of positive are going to rise. So, because that's what we've seen, you know, uncomfortable as it may be, but that's what people want. They want strong people that can just do things and not be tied up with the red tape, you know. Mars
or
doesn't
people
like
that can people that can provide them a sense of clear direction, which is what Mars provides. Because I think, if anything, we've been far too Neptuned out, isn't it? And Laurie, from that other chat, wasn't Neptune transiting the 10th house? Transit Neptune on the 10th house for the New South Africa chart?
The New South Africa chart, does it have Pisces on the 10th house? Is it a Sag rising? I'm not sure.
No. It's Aquarius rising.
Okay, what Neptune is Pisces, so it's not transiting. Okay. I think it's Uranus that is transiting. I'm not
sure. We're gonna confuse the other audience members.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Sorry, right. I apologize.
We can have this chat, you know, separately. Yeah. But I think I will end the recording now. Thank you all very much for your time. And I hope that this sort of demystifies Vedic astrology for you, many of you. It's not something difficult or horribly, you know, complex, but it is something that simple rules can yield results as well. Yeah, thank you very much. And everyone's going to get a recording. And I will send the recording out this evening sometime. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That was very illuminating.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah,
amazing.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank Thanks a lot, Nathan.
All
That was
right.
great. It was really great.
Amazing.
Let me just make sure I know how to end this. There we go.